typically on most of your site plans and your elevations and perspectives, you're going to have a lot of green. So get ready to start laying down green. My first pass, I'm going to put green down on everything except, walkways, pools, patios. I'm going to cover the trees. I'm going to cover anything that would be a grassed area. I'm going to go outside of the property lines with that broken line wash. And I'm going really quickly. I also like to feather it out at the end by doing some of those stippled dots. And you can kind of see it up on the board. But it's faint and subtle, and we'll see how long these markers last. If I miss some spots, that's not a problem. Okay, I want to, if I go over the lines a little, I don't care, but I want to try and get to not color over the things that I don't want colored over. And we're starting to get into some of that here. Now you probably can't hear the marker tapping, but if you were here next to me, I'm coloring over these trees, you'd hear this like Morse code like tapping. And that's just my marker. I'm just lifting it up. Putting down a layer on my trees. I'm not going to color in the driveway. Okay, so we put down our first coat of green. Now then the question is, do I have any other big areas to fill? I really don't, but I've got a driveway here, I've got a concrete walkway here, I've got a stone patio here, and this little blob I put in as a koi pond. It really isn't in the design, but I wanted to get some water in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do the water, which I'm going to start out with a light blue. And I check my markers over here first. That's pretty light. That's even lighter. I can't really see much of it, so I'm probably going to go with this one. And I'm just going to lay down some blue in there. Now, I'm not going to color the house. For the walkways and the asphalt, I tend to just put in a little bit of grays. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's sad. There's one of my markers that was put away without a cap on it. Goodbye $6. And there's another one that was put, was that mine? Let's see if I can find a cap for that one. There's a brick white which won't even show up. Sorry folks, we'll see if I can save this one. 30% gray. Alright, I got a 30% gray, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of hit the edges. I don't even know if you can see that on the screen. but I'm just putting kind of much like we did with our stippling. I'm just going for the corners. Alright, that's my first layer. My second layer, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to start putting more on top of this. So I'm going to grab that. In this case it was the Prismacolor lime green. I want to put a second coat on all the trees. Just the trees. And don't hesitate to dot it. You can barely see a difference here because it's on tracing paper. And I'm just filling in the entire tree, but just the trees. Go ahead and let the marker puddle a little bit. Yeah, I think I got all of them. Now, you can start to see where they're standing out a little, but it's not a lot. Hopefully. Got a couple other greens here. That's pretty dark. Hopefully this one's a little lighter. And it is. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my trees, and remembering that the sun comes from up and to the left, I'm going to go down and to the right, and I'm going to fill in about 3/4 of the tree, of each tree. And if anything, I would fill in more of the tree rather than less of it. And I'm being kind of loose with this, especially on the smaller trees. Now you can start to see the trees sort of poking out a little bit. Trying to think if there's anything else I'd want to color in here. You know, I'm going to leave the roof white. I might go ahead and put another layer of this gray. And just kind of pick at the corners. I'm going to be going back and adding a little more texture to this stoned area. So I'm just, again, aiming for the corners. Corners and edges, putting a second coat of gray in there. Just a little. And again, I apologize if it's not showing up real well on the screen. You can also come over here and look at it if you want, if you don't feel like you're seeing it. But a lot of it's pretty subtle stuff. Alright, so I now put my second layer of green on the trees. I put a little bit more on the gray. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to get my super dark green. And I'm just going to do a little strip on the rear, the down and to the right on each one of the trees, kind of going where the shadows would go. And I'm just going to do like one little pass with it. And I can get away with something that I'm doing here more so on the tracing paper than I could on Bond. Okay, so now I just put a layer of green on the back of them. Now the trees are starting to stand out pretty well. Now I'm going to go back with my light green, and what I want to do is I want to kind of smudge it a little. If you'll notice right here, it's pretty distinct where the dark green went into the lighter green. Sorry, I've got the wrong green there. Get the... So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and blend that away with my second green by just kind of tapping it and smudging it a little in there. I'm just trying to stick to the edge for the most part, just to make it, if you can watch it on trace, you can smear this stuff pretty well. And it really looks loosey-goosey when you're doing this. It's like, what a mess. But again, on tracing paper, the nice thing is you can kind of work the ink in and get rid of those hard edges that I see on the tree. So now all of a sudden it becomes, instead of just being 2 tones or 3 tones, it's like 4 or 5. You can see how they softened up there. Got to be careful not to erase all of your dark green, but now I want to go through and I want to do some similar stuff on my water. And I also want to add a little character to the light green. But let's go to the water. I don't know if this is my hyper light. Oh no, that's a little darker. Good. So let's just kind of go around the edges. I haven't labeled this on the drawing, but now that you've seen me doing it, you'll know. Alright, so I put a little bit there. Now I want to take my light one and kind of smudge that out a little bit so that you don't so it doesn't look as much like dots. As it just starts to become a tone. We're going to call that good. I'm going to take my light green and I'm going to start hitting some of the corners to try and make the building come out a little bit. Again, as we notice, the second layer of this green doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, it's, if I tap it a few times, I can get a fair amount in there and then just kind of feather that out. Look for your corners. If you got a little area like between the sidewalk and the house, you can go ahead and really wail on it. Almost half the puddle to get any work out of this thing. And all you're trying to do is just highlight again, start to get that second tone in there on the grass. And you can throw a few in wherever you'd like. Oops, not there preferably. I just drew over the stone wall, which I'm going to make gray in a minute. Forgot about that. Now I also like to notice on the edges I've kind of done these dots and stippled away from it. I don't like a hard line edge. I like and I'm going to put a little gray down on the stone wall. All right, and the reality is on this drawing, that's about all I would do for markers. And now you're looking at this and saying to yourself, well, it really doesn't look like anything except kind of a blob. And I've got the drawing underneath it, so it looks even more blob-like. I'm going to go ahead and slip a sheet under here, I hope. There it is. I mean, that's what you got. And it's really nothing to write home about, is it? And it just looks kind of like a messy, icky waste. This is where all the work you've been doing for line work comes in handy. And what you get to do is either figure out how to do, when you go to color your drawings in the future, you'll have your drawings in ink, like those nice ink drawings that you did, and you're going to color over a print of those. You'll print it out like you did up there without the titles on it at this point. You'll then color that, and then you get to redraw everything you did on top of that. So let's watch what happens when I start doing my line work. And remember your rules for the line work. Same rules apply. What I've given you is a CAD drawing. This is part of the set that went out, or is going out. Probably a 90% complete set, was sent to the owner yesterday. And this was, I took the construction drawings and stripped some of the stuff off of them, because there were a lot more dimensions and notes, and I didn't really have a site plan per se, so I put a roof on everything. But now all of a sudden you're starting to see those trees stand out a little better. Same rules apply. And actually I'm going out of order, because usually on my ink work I would do my straight lines first, but I'm about to do some of those. But since I started on the trees, I might as well finish it. Okay, got all the trees. Good. Let's start doing some of that hard line work. But now all of a sudden that mess, even with just those lines, you can see that the messy ink work from before is not looking quite so awful. You don't notice a lot of the mess when you're doing this. I don't know. Oh, I got lucky. I am just going completely out of order on this stuff. I should be doing my curved hard lines first, my angles. Now, I'm not going to put shingles on the house, and I'm not going to draw the lines for the metal roofing. I'm more concerned with the landscape than I am with the building, and can't do much here until I do the curved lines to go with it. I'm going to get the house done for the most part. This fireplace, by the way, the owner picked it. It's pretty wild. Have anybody used my little landscapers? I don't know what it's called. You got to read the print. Whatever the name is, it's a Cor-Ten steel. It's basically this rectangle of Cor-Ten steel with a rectangle hole in the middle, and it's fired up by gas. It's pretty wild. If you get bored, look up it's on the name's on the drawing, and you should look it up. I'm anxious. I've never used anything like this, and I'm curious to see.
What burner system?
What brand is it?
The burner inside the fireplace, or is it in the core, whatever that is?
Yeah, I'll show you. I'm actually, when you guys are drawing, I might pull it up. It's weird, but it looks like it's going to be pretty cool. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and get these curved lines in. From here on in, I forgot to do that one. It's pretty much but I don't know if you're noticing. I know I am, because I always love getting the ink work in. Or I just love the effect of the ink work over the color, because before you do this, it's just a mess. What's the one on that tree?
The pool guy that I work with, or one of them, he says that there's a special school that he sends his guys to learn how to do shading for pool water. And it's a 2-week course just to learn how to do shading for pool work.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Nice. It's get the edge on this. I'm losing. Some of these lines are pretty faint. As long as I'm here. Alright, I've got to do the stone wall, I got to do the line work in the trees. I do want to put another line on this roof. Now I'm not tracing exactly what was on the drawing for the stone wall. This was done in CAD, and it's not, it got the point across for a builder, but it's not really what I want graphically, so don't just trace exactly what I've drawn there. Alright, in a minute I'm going to switch to just focusing on the house, and more, not just the house, but around the house, because I think you folks are pretty, would everybody agree that I know how to trace trees? Alright, so there's really no, I'm going to wind up doing them all, I don't even know who I'm kidding. any thoughts on what I should be doing next for line work? What would you folks do next? Leave that one there. Well, what's that? Yeah, I'd profile, I'd shadow, I'd start adding those double lines on my pavement. So I'm probably gonna go right to, I might profile that house and then throw some shadows on it and the trees. And then I get to do the property line, which is always exciting, but we're gonna do something a little different with the property line, which is gonna require a marker. Alright, I'm actually gonna do that right now. One of the problems with these drawings is you wind up with a ton of green. And if you can work any red into your drawing, red is the opposite of green, and it tends to create what's known as a color shift, and it adds a lot of interest to the drawing. So I'm gonna wind up doing my property line in red. And I'm gonna go over this with a fat Sharpie, but I don't want to draw the red line over the fat Sharpie, because I don't want to smear it. But you can start to see as soon as I like doing this at the end, I just don't want to get much more ink work down there. You can start to see the difference adding that splash of red does to bring some life into an otherwise all green drawing. It just Anybody ever hear of ST organs? Like a piano and organ? There was a famous brand. They were a big time organ maker. I think they were even making them maybe even up until the 60s. But see how that sets off on the green? Does a nice job. So now I'm going to go ahead and profile and start my shadows. I'm going to start with the profile of the house. I'm going to shadow the trees. Again, doing all the stuff you would do, and I'm going to start getting some more texture in there with my pen.
Do you put a property line through your stone wall?
I did.
And then you're supposed to do that?
It's kind of up to you, but the stone wall is most of the property line on that one side.
Right.
So in this case, I did definitely put it through. Because if I didn't do it, it would, again, you'd miss out on that much. For a little section of stone wall, I might let the stone wall stick through. It's a judgment call. Okay, I've got my profile down. I'm gonna start working on shadows. I only have one tree that I didn't put stems in, and I just can't have that. Okay, I'm gonna shadow the house first. Again, going down and to the right. And it's a big house, so it would probably have a pretty big shadow, but I'm not gonna do that because I don't wanna overwhelm the drawing. So kind of the same rules. You know, I'm just using, oops, forgot a little profile line there. Just using my fat Sharpie and I will put a little shadow on the chimney just to give it a little punch. I am going to want a double line. This is a separate lower roof there, so I don't want to profile right through here, but I am going to double line it to make it look stand out a little bit more. And then I'm going to start to and I'm going to do the same thing with the main house versus the addition. Well, at any rate, the reason I talked about SD organs, they're made in Brattleboro. They were made in Brattleboro, Vermont, and this house was supposedly the original founder of SD Organ's house in the 1800s. All right, so I've got that down. Now I'm going to start doing shadows on the trees, and let's see what happens with those. And at this point, I could even stick a little bit of white under there, and you can start to see what's happening. And again, notice how much these trees pop when I put the shadows on. Now I've got a couple things down here. I've got the fireplace, I've got a generator, I've got a couple heat pumps. I want to shadow those, but I don't want to go crazy with a big thick line like with the trees, because I really don't want it. So I'm going to use my thin Sharpie. You know, I could maybe have used my heavier Sharpie, but I think it would stand out a little too much. Call that about good. Alright, so now I'm going to do a little quick double line around my edges. Now, I do have a scale on this drawing, but I would never put it right there. I'm gonna wanna move that someplace else on the drawing, and I can do that by just sliding it underneath, and or I can even just skip the scale for now, and we'll just stick with the color. Alright, I want to put a little texture. Now let's get some black and white texture, and I'm going to go ahead I'm starting to hint at some stonework on this stone wall, this stone pavement. What do you want? Whatever you'd like to call it. It's a paved area out back. And I might even throw a little more marker on that in a minute, and we'll see what'll happen. The key again being, we're just hinting at the stone, we're not drawing each individual little stone. I'm going to put a little texture on that. Sidewalk, driveway, excuse me. And, oh, that's stuck. Just throwing a couple more lines in the stone wall. All right, now, oh, double line this. I'm going to go ahead and do my grass lines real fast. Now for my favorite part, I gotta do the property. I'll do the property line in black in a minute. I'm just gonna put a fat Sharpie line on that. I didn't want to do that originally because the red would have smeared it. But a fun thing to do. I've got these fancy dancy Prismacolor sticks, which been sealed shut with art tape by my children. I'll show you. Alright. They look like pastels, they're not. They're little squares of just the lead of the Prismacolor. And what I'm going to use it for is the yellow flash. Now, I don't know how much of this you're going to see. Yeah, start to see what's happening on those trees. You just put a little sunlight on the sunlight side. Now, you probably don't have the sticks, and that's okay because you got your Prismacolor pencils, and And you're going to go ahead and do it with a colored pencil. And you can do the same thing. Just rub it on there, get a little yellow in there. And you start to see how it makes those trees. See the difference between these trees with the yellow and these trees without? It makes a huge difference. You can lightly put it in there and then just kind of what's going to be left? Let's do property line, and then we're going to do one other. I'm going to go ahead with my fat Sharpie and put a little, I almost don't want to now, but I'm not going to do it. Let me see how that looks without. I am going to leave that alone. If I wanted to put a black line in there, I would even do it with my thin Sharpie. I don't want to put the black Sharpie on top of that red because it's going to make a lot of that red disappear. And I really like how that red's working. So I'm just putting a thin black line in there. And speaking of red, it's time to do the apples. These are not apple trees. However, remember my discussion about trying to sneak a little red in? One place you can do that is in your trees. Just gently if you got a decent red marker, and you might have it. Did you guys get a brick red marker? No reds, just blues and greens? Alright, well you can steal mine on occasion. What was that bad boy that I used? Just put an occasional little red dot in a couple of the trees. Doesn't stand up very well on the tracing paper. It would stand up better on bond. But throwing a couple dots in the trees. We can call them apples. We can call them what we want. I'm going to call this one done once I and that never set myself enough space. Okay, so I mean, which one's going to excite a client more? I think this kind of gets across. The information's here, but this, I think, is going to lead them to understand better what they're getting, at least in the beginning. Having said that, I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to try to.